Good morning, Lewis. I wanted to show you something that could very potentially be a problem with your print. I've downloaded your file that has the layers separated for the bed, the Southern Motel 2. I've taken layer 4, which is this postcard on the bottom right-hand corner, and I've copied it. And now you can see layer 4 copy. And I'm going to zoom in on this so you can see what I'm seeing. And I'm seeing little lines that go vertically in the pavement here. You can kind of see them. They're very faint, but they are, I believe they're a function of the dot pattern that's printed on the postcard that's then magnified when you see it on your screen because you're seeing the dots. Now, what would happen with this when you reprint this is you're going to get even more dots. So let's look in closely at this, and you can kind of see this little, you can see a grid of spaces where the color seems to be blocked into little segments. And the reason we're seeing that is because it's comprised of many different colors that are making up what looks like one color. But this is what happens when you create a halftone of that. Halftone meaning you have converted it into dots of many colors. Now, the halftone filter when it at its smallest, at this size that you have this document, is going to be too big for this in Photoshop's function to show you adequately what happens because those halftones are too large. That's dramatic. So what I'm going to do, undo that halftone. I'm going to take that layer that we had, and I'm going to make it about 4 times bigger. But in this case, holding down the Shift key, I'm just going to make it as big as your file. Now that will make those halftones seem a quarter smaller. So I'm going to take and I'm going to bring that layer to the top. Here it is again, and I'm going to take that layer and do the halftone. And I'd like you to, before I do the halftone, to notice these lines here, these vertical lines through the pavement here. You're still there. I'm going to make that halftone. And now you can see that there is you can see that little dot pattern, that grid. Let me go back to this view. And as you can see at this view, you can see these vertical lines. They get more accentuated because now you have dots within dots that have made the dot pattern even more recognizable. You can see it through every single area of the photo now. Even in the sky, you can see this little grid. In the trees, you can see a grid. So, and the reason I'm telling you this and showing it to you is because this is what happens when you scan halftones and then print them again as halftones. It's kind of dangerous. So, not to say that your project can't be done, but let me undo that. I'm going to get rid of this layer. Okay, my knowledge of what will happen is when you scan halftones is not the greatest. However, something has to be done. And I believe what you can do is you could take, we just use layer 4 as an example. I'm going to zoom in on it so it fills the screen here. So you can see layer 4 back to what you provided. Now if you take this layer, and I'm going to just select that layer, and the way that I'm selecting it is I go over to my layers palette, I put my mouse over the icon that represents what the image looks like, I hold down the command key and I shift, and I click. I hold down the command key and I click, and that selects just everything that's in that layer. And you can see my marching ants are now around this image. And I'm going to go into my filter menu and come down to blur. I'm going to come down to surface blur. And with that surface blur, it's set at 2 and 57. It's way too much of a blur. But what I'm going to do is move that probably down to about 17, 15. And I have the preview option selected in my surface blur dialog window. But I'm going to zoom in on this. Zoom out just a little bit. So here's what it looks like after the blur has applied. Here's what it looks like before. So before, you can see much more of the dots, you can see some of the pixelation, and with the preview button selected, this is what it looks like after it gets rid of a little bit of the information that was filling those areas, blends them together. So I'm going to accept that change. I'm going to zoom back out so you can see it, and I'm actually going to put this at 100%. Let me go to 100%. Let's go. Sorry about that. Here we are at 67. Here's 100. So that was Command Option 0. So this is at 100%. This is a very good idea of how it's going to look when it's printed. So this is what it looks like with the blur. This is what it looks like without the blur. With, without. With this blur, you're going to avoid or minimize that problem that you had with the double half-toning. So just something to consider.